Everybody, Richard Cowling here. In this presentation, I'm going to talk about managing thicket encroachment in the foster reserves, how we are responding to the problem of bush or thicket encroachment, which is beginning to have negative impacts on the biodiversity of the reserve. Now, just to refresh your minds, we at FOSTER, Friends of the St. Francis Nature Areas, manage 330 hectares of reserves. The first being Irma Boyson Nature Reserve here, then Seal Point Nature Reserve, Seal Bay Nature Reserve, and the Cape St. Francis Nature Reserve. Together, these reserves harbour about 400 species of plants, many of which are extremely rare and threatened with extinction. So the aim of the talk today is just to provide you with some background and then of the problem, and then some ideas or examples of how we're going to address this problem. This slide just gives you a brief overview of what some of these reserves look like. Irma Boyson, Cape St. Francis Reserve with Erica chloroloma, a dune heath, one of the rare and endangered species that we have to manage in the reserve. Seal Point Nature Reserve, as it looked in the old days before bitou invaded. And then, of course, the Seal Bay Nature Reserve, which has some forest-like vegetation. Foster generally get up to? Well, most of our funds are allocated to maintaining the network of trails that we have through the system, the reserve system. These are trails for both pedestrians as well as bicycles. A lot of money has been spent on alien removal, but we're almost on top of that problem now. Fire break maintenance is also very costly, and we spend money on signage, and we also organize activities with the community like snare removal. It also spends a lot of effort in monitoring wildlife. We set up camera traps across the reserve and are getting an idea of how wildlife is managing to cope with the increasing traffic, pedestrian and traffic that our reserves are experiencing. Okay, the purpose of this slide is just to illustrate some features in a dune landscape, such as the one in which our reserves are located, illustrate some features of the hydrology. So the important thing to remember, it's in the dune swales, these areas where moisture is highest, and the dune ridges have much lower moisture. Now, I'm not going to go into the reasons for that. They're quite easy to explain, but we don't have time. And then, of course, as we get closer to the sea, where the bedrock is very close to the surface of the soil, extensive wetlands form, and generally the coastal margin has higher soil moisture than in more inland areas. Okay, so up on those slopes, which are with very droughty soils, you get fynbos. And most of the species in our landscape occur in fynbos. However, this fynbos up on these slopes is not prone to bush encroachment. It's able to persist there without fire for decades. And then down in the valleys, you get thicket. And thicket is a completely different vegetation to fynbos. It prefers much higher soil moisture, and it doesn't burn as readily. And then sometimes in these interdune areas or swales, where there's say a calcarenite or some rock close to the surface, you can get these perched into dune wetlands, which are very vulnerable to bush encroachment. And then, of course, right along the coastal margin, these wetlands actually, the soil moisture comes to the surface, and you get these wetlands which support moisture almost every year. Now, it's these moist sites, I just want to reiterate, these moist sites, not the ridges, but in the swales, that are most vulnerable to encroachment by thicket. So in terms of management issues, particularly issues around trying to reduce thicket encroachment into some of our moister areas, we have quite a big problem in our reserves, because basically these are urban reserves. If we have a look at the boundaries of our reserves, we can see in many places they abut directly onto a township. We're also part of a greater urban or semi-urban region. So it's very difficult for us to reinstate the forces, as I'll explain later, that were responsible for naturally preventing thicket encroachment. For example, fire. It's very difficult to implement a series of controlled burns in our reserves because of the extreme danger that this may, the risk associated with human settlements on our boundaries, plus the lack of capacity we have in the municipality to implement a burn of this nature. Also, we're not in a huge wild region where we could consider reintroducing mega herbivores such as black rhino and elephant that would have certainly played a big role in keeping our vegetation more open. Elephants in combination with fire probably would have been a potent force for reducing the spread of thicket-like vegetation in our dune landscape. The result of this absence of fire and mega herbivory is that thicket is slowly beginning to thicken up, or not so slowly, actually rapidly thickening up in our moist areas and overtopping the more sun-loving plants that used to grow there. Thicket invades via underground branches, actually, which it extends, foraging every more widely. Obviously, when these tend to forage into moist areas, there's rapid growth, and you get the formation of a dense hedge-like vegetation. Okay, now we're going to talk about a pretty serious invader, a thicket species, bitou, or Osteospermum moniliferum. This plant is indigenous. It's widely distributed along the Cape Coast. However, it always occupies disturbed sites. So in areas where, for example, you've cleared acacia cyclops, like this site on the wild coast, what happens is that after removal of the aliens, you get a big stand of bitou replacing them. Bitou can form very dense hedges that outcompete all the other vegetation, all the other species. And it's a much quicker process of invasion than is the case with other thicket species. Okay, in our reserves, we have some 26 species that are classified as rare or endangered. In other words, as red data book species. So they are officially recognized as species being vulnerable to extinction. What's interesting is that most of these species require open, sunny, and moist conditions, precisely the areas where thicket is tending to invade. We also have a bunch of species which, while not classified as red data book species because they're big populations outside of our region, but for which we only have a couple of individuals. For example, this fountain bush here, which grows only at a few of the wetland sites, the interdune wetland sites in the reserve system, or this soft flower seed, for which is only been noted in one place in a wetland in the reserve system. So let's get a handle on this invasion process. Let's just see how extensive it is. So this photo was taken by my father in April 1965. It's what we would call today the Seal Point Nature Reserve. In front of it, you can see the very iconic lighthouse. Notice that the vegetation here is a short turf, a grassy turf, mainly buffalo quirk grass, and with a high diversity of herbs and dwarf shrubs. It was maintained in this state because the lighthouse keeper used to keep a few sheep, but probably in the past this was a grazing lawn for wild animals. And let's have a look at what it looks now these days. You can see that this lawn has been entirely and everywhere invaded by bitou. Only in the wetland area that we see over here has bitou not managed to invade. So here's another side, also in the lighthouse area. In the foreground, you can see this indigofera, this indigo, which is a red data book species. That shrub there in the background is also a red data book species. Very species-rich community. And then this is what it looks like these days, completely covered in bitou, which has smothered the populations of those red data book species, and is obviously a problem that we have to respond to. So FOSTER needs to respond to this problem because our vision is to conserve, maintain, protect biodiversity. Our mission is to nurture and preserve biodiversity. This is what our prime job is to do. And in doing this, in order to do this, we've got to aim for zero extinction. We can't allow any known species of rare animal or plant to go extinct under our watch. So way back, I think it was in August 2021, FOSTER decided to experiment with a bit of bitou removal at this site here. We call this the tennis court path. It's a path leading from the tennis courts in Cape St. Francis to De Hoop Single. It's a wetland area. There is moisture. There's a bit of Table Mountain bedrock underneath there. So the moisture does come to the surface, not every year, but quite frequently. And the area was becoming extremely overwhelmed by bitou. We noticed a small population of this critically endangered plant. It's called a hook leaf Cape gorse. We noticed that a few individuals were surviving just alongside this path here. So we thought, let's do some work and see whether we can get this population back and healthy again. And So we put in a tractor there and did this a rather narrow strip along the path. And what we found in a year or two was a massive regeneration of the population of this critically endangered plant. From 1 or 2 individuals, when I last counted, there were at least 30. So that's a remarkably successful story of fine-scale management to keep species populations healthy. Given that the small pilot project was successful, we went to Rotary and asked them for funding to do it on a larger scale. And this is what you see before you. The area was cleared mechanically, followed by hand clearance, lots of weeding. Anyway, this was done in March 2024, and this spring of 2024, there's been a massive growth of, or how can I say, a bloom of Synesia elegans, which is a weedy annual, very pretty. But more importantly, there's been good evidence of reseeding of fynbos species like this Calumnia, and on the margin, a lot of thicket species are sprouting. So yeah, it's been successful so far, but we need to keep an eye on it and see what other species come. And in the lighthouse area, we've also been busy, funded by, again, by Rotary. We want to try and restore the lighthouse precinct to the beautiful vegetation that existed there before that bitou eventually overtopped it. So we've been clearing, both using mechanical and manual means, also taken seeds from and cuttings from plants in the area and are growing them up to restore, where necessary, populations of the species that come from that area. And after the big storm surges the past few years, it's opened up and disturbed the dune the coastal vegetation, and of course gazillions of bitou seedlings have come up, and we've been weeding those areas to make sure that we can maintain the beautiful coastal communities that exist there, or that did exist prior to bitou invasion. And then finally, we're clearing some of these wetland areas in the reserves, regions that may not even get surface moisture, but where the water table, surface water, but where the water table is sufficiently high to support wetland plants, there we're clearing away any thicket or tall fynbos plants that are encroaching into this habitat to keep the habitat open. So summing up, FOSTER's main task is to conserve biodiversity. In the absence of regular fine megaherbivory, thicket is encroaching in damp areas. These damp areas are also the homes of many rare and endangered species. To prevent extinctions, FOSTER needs to prevent thicket encroachment in some areas. So please do support FOSTER. Our aim of ensuring or striving for zero extinction needs your support. We have lots of work to do, so do support us. And thank you very much.